Good evening, everybody. Yes, do you mind? I come bearing temporary gifts. I need these back as Kirby Elementary School would kill me if they don't have this back by the morning, but just for you to see what a Chromebook looks like if you have not used one in the past. So what I'd like to speak with you all tonight, through the work with our curriculum directors, Dr. Dean, Miss Abby, Garrett Kelly, our senior network supervisor, and Dr. Niehaus, we've begun to develop a comprehensive plan to share with you a roadmap where we'd like to be when it comes to the use of technology, not only just with our teachers, but with our students as well in our district. So at first we were just going to be talking about BYOD, but it would be most beneficial to at least share with you guys where we would like to be in a couple of other areas as well. If you'll see, no, you're fine. We moved over to Gmail this past year, and our students now have access to email as they've had in the past, but by moving into Gmail itself, our staff and students have been able to have much more access with G Suite for Education. So students are now using Google Docs and Google Slides and Sheets where it might be, and they're creating some amazing things. As you all know, we're also moving towards a learning management system in our district called Schoology. And at the secondary level, Schoology not only is going to be a place for teachers and students to house information and receive material, it's going to be our grade book as well too. So this is going to be a big area that we're going to be focusing on. So as you know, obviously we're using a heck of a lot more technology in our district than we might have in the past. So some of the items that I'd like to share with you tonight is a 3-year teacher desktop replacement, just a conversation about that. And then what BYOD, which acronyms, means bring your own device, what that would look like in Grosse Pointe schools. So within that, we want to define a couple of things. We want to talk about device enabled and device welcome, what training and professional development could look like to be using Bring Your Own Device with fidelity in our district, what support could look like, and also I've provided to you a handbook that we would be sharing with the community. Another big piece of this is going to be what would equity look like as well. And then one of the last things I would like to share with you are some estimated costs as well. So if we dive right into it, one of the first things that we'd like to share is what desktop replacements would be looking like in our district. Right now, teachers have desktops in our district, and you'll also find them in our computer labs as well. Over the past 4 years, we've been paying around $500,000 a year to pay off a loan that we took out. We're soon going to be coming off of that loan. And so now we're starting to have that discussion of what should computer access look like in our district. Again, having that conversation about using a learning management system, using Google, which allows us to teach and learn from almost anywhere, we started taking a look at what could laptops look like if we were to replace the desktop. As you know, laptops, they can be mobile, and so they don't necessarily always have to be stationed in one place at one time. Laptops allow for a much more flexible learning environment, and the staff can create lessons and grade where they please as well. So if we were to be looking at teacher laptops, we'd like to space this out as much as possible. So we're kind of looking at this almost as a 5-year cycle. And so this very first year, which next year would be the first year of this, we'd be focusing on the middle schools. And if you once I get to the BYOD part, you'll understand why we're focusing on the middle schools first. But what we'd be looking at is our teaching staff would be receiving laptops. And so we'd be seeing 147 the first year in our middle school. And how did we get to that number? Right now we've got 120 teachers in our middle schools. We also had to look at what backup could look like as well. Say something's broken, what that could look like for replacement. Then we also had to look at substitutes, right? So if a teacher's able to take a laptop home and all of a sudden they're sick, what would we be providing to our substitutes? So I wanted to throw that number out there, at least so that we can kind of get an estimate of what this could look like. Year 2, we'd be moving to the high schools, and so same formula, we'd be looking at about 215 devices to replace. And then year 3, we'd be looking at 262 devices for our elementary school staff. Years 4 and 5 would simply be maintenance. That's where we'd be looking. So I'm going to share with you an example of one of the laptops that we've been looking at. This is a Dell Latitude 3490. If you looked online right now, you might take a look at the price and go, hold on, I've seen that for much, much cheaper. But if we're looking at it in an enterprise way, and if we're looking at a high-performing computer for our staff, as well as something that could be a docking station for our teachers to be diving into, a Dell Latitude with a solid-state hard drive would really be where we'd like our teachers to go, especially if they'd be using something like this over the next 5 years. We'd also want to be providing them with some type of briefcase or backpack, if you will. So if we're looking at the year 1 cost of this, we'd be looking at $212,000. Again, this is an estimate of where we're going. I'm not sharing with you the many different quotes that we've had out there because this is just information that I'm sharing with you right now. So that being said, with our teachers moving towards laptops, really the main catalyst behind this is what could bring your own device look like in our district. So first off, the definition of what this is bring your own device allows students to bring in their own personal electronic devices at the school. And we're trying to define it as much as we possibly can, what those devices could be. So may not be limited to tablets such as an iPad, but a Chromebook and a laptop as well. Smartphones, you could argue, could be used in a bring your own device setting, but if we're truly talking about using a device as homework and assignments, smartphone is great for a couple of different apps out there, but I don't know if you'd really want to be typing a thesis paper on one of those. So with teacher approval, students would be using their devices in the classroom, and they'd be accessing and saving information from the internet. And they'd be collaborating with other learners, and they'd be utilizing productivity tools available to them. It's been pretty amazing just in the past several years because things are going more to the cloud, what access students can truly have just by going on the internet rather than saving most things to a particular device. So why in Grosse Pointe schools, right? What's the purpose of this? I'm not going to stand here and say that this is automatically going to increase test scores by any means. But what that's going to be doing is we are going to continue to prepare our students to be college and career ready. In the college classroom, I mean, as soon as you step into any class or any type of lecture hall, that's what you see that's up there. And that's where students are storing their information, and that's where they're receiving information from their teachers as well. They're helping students become responsible digital citizens. When we're going towards that, we're continue to have the conversations with the students. What does it mean to have a positive digital footprint out there? What should you be sharing? And it really just offers students more opportunities to create and collaborate, to communicate and use critical thinking skills that's out there. The question is when you have a device in your hands, are there certain things that you really need to be memorizing anymore? What we really want to be looking at is not what you know, it's what can you do with that information. And the bring your own device will allow students to have a dedicated device at school. Taking a look at our strategic plan, this is really, it's part of the strategic plan in action that's happening here. Really the guiding principles that we have focused on are innovation, the 21st century learning. Along with the infrastructure and action points, what we're looking to do is create a blueprint for future-ready classrooms. So now when we're having this conversation of bring your own device in our school district, we're looking at this over the next 3 years, and we're looking at it in 2 different ways. The first way would be a device-enabled classroom. This would mean that students would be bringing a device to class with the expectation that they would be using the device for their learning, right? We're starting to go through training with Schoology for our teachers, and teachers are now able to load not only just materials in there, they can also include assessments as well. They can also include many different homework assignments too. So if I were to take myself as an English teacher, for example, maybe I wouldn't just always be focusing on, hey, let's focus on some vocab and you guys are going to be creating a sentence in there. Maybe they'd be doing it in a discussion board. And so they're not just sharing it with me, the teacher, they'd be able to share it with the 30 other students that are in their classroom. So a device-enabled classroom would be saying, you are bringing your device to this class with the expectation for it to be used. We're going to be focusing on that in the middle schools at first. We're also focusing on an area called device welcome. Because of the fact that we're using more technology, there can absolutely be an expectation that students would be using a device in their class. But because of capacity, because of several other reasons, because we'd like to focus on this over a 3-year scale, a device welcome allows students to, it's up to the teacher, but students could be bringing a device to the classroom, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they would be using technology at all times, but it could be reasonable that they could be using something like that. So I have a little timeline for you. Year 1 would be starting next year, and again, we'd really be focusing on the middle schools as a whole. If we're really going to pinpoint this even more, it's not just every single middle school classroom. It would specifically be the social studies and the English classrooms as well, which you'll see in the next slide. That would be meeting with department chairs and talking with them, not saying to change up your curriculum by any means, but it's asking what is it that you're currently doing and how can something like Schoology or other different applications assist with this way of thinking. Over year 2, we'd be looking to move a bit more into the high school, but not the high school as a whole. So we'd be looking at grades 6 through 10. And by year 3, grades 6 through 12, we'd really like to focus that all of those courses could be in a device-enabled environment. So again, students would be bringing their devices to class, and the expectation would be that they could be utilizing these instruments. I kind of already discussed this, but you could just see this a little bit more. Year 1 would be English language arts and social studies in the middle school. Year 2, we'd be taking this on a bit more, but it would make sense because most would see that this is happening in our district, right? Because we would now have had Schoology for over a year. The middle schools, we'd be focusing on those core areas, English language arts, social studies, math, and science. And then moving into the high school, we'd be looking at English, math, and science as a whole. And by year 3, again, we'd be focusing on all of the different course levels in the district. One of the biggest items that we want to consider, though, when thinking about this is we certainly know not every single person can afford to have a device. So equity is a big part of this conversation. Right now in our middle schools, we have, like Parcells, for example, we have 132 Chromebooks in there. This would be an opportunity for us to reallocate those Chromebooks that are currently being used and provide them to students who may not be able to afford a device so that they could still partake in this. So I want to be very clear, we're not having the conversation about taking anything that maybe the PTO has provided, but basically these would be devices that are currently district owned. And again, we just want to make sure that every single middle school student, especially that first year, is going to have a device. How can we do that to get a more accurate number? We could be sending out a survey to our families, talking about not only just would you be bringing in your own device, but also wireless access as well, so that we can get a more broad understanding of what this looks like. Currently budgeting, before the survey has even gone out, just looking at, let's say 20% of our students, our middle school students, would not be bringing in their own device. That would be about 360 devices. Based off of the numbers that we currently have in our middle schools, we would need to purchase around 50 devices to be able to provide for our students. Again, without having sent that survey out to families, we're never really sure exactly where we are, but I think the 20% is a good number at least to start having that conversation. If we are providing a device to students as well, we also have to look at web filtering. In order to continue to be in compliance with certain laws, if we are providing a device to a student to take home, they would still have to have some web filtering that would be going on. right? And there are a couple of different ways of looking at that. I've seen several companies that have come out that have claimed to be free. I've seen other people, such as our current firewall, have an added cost to that. If I'm taking a look at this as a whole, I think it would be safe to say that the cost could be around $30,000 to be providing this. And then we'll also be looking to develop a list of locations within our community for Wi-Fi access. So again, this is kind of looking at this as a great opportunity to not just have learning only occur within the confines of our buildings, but also reaching out to community partners as well too, and just, even talking to Starbucks in the village, having those conversations of, hey, this is where we'd like to be going. How could you be able to assist with your free Wi-Fi too? The libraries have Wi-Fi access as well. So in regards to sharing this information with the community, in your packet you should have received a handbook that I've provided to you. And what this does is it really explains the purpose of something like Bring Your Own Device, but it also has recommendations of where we'd like to go with a suggested device. How we're defining Bring Your Own Device in our district would be a 10-inch screen or larger with the keyboard with wireless access, okay? Not saying that an iPad absolutely cannot work that way, but in order for us to be able to provide that type of environment, that learning environment, we would make those suggestions. So in this handbook here, I've made 2 suggestions, and you guys are actually taking a look at one of those. It would technically be an older model, but the Chromebook that I'm sharing with you right now is an 11-inch HP that we currently have throughout our district. We've had some great success with this as well. It's not too big. And students would be able to carry these around. What's really nice is a Chromebook, if you're not familiar with it, it's really a web browser. But because of the fact that we are a G Suite district, all of our students' information would be there for them. As soon as they sign in, their email is there. They have access to any type of documents that they would be saving on Google Drive. So you could either be here in our district at home, or you could be on vacation with your family, and you could still access all of that information there. So we have some suggestions of what we would be making in there. We also have some frequently asked questions as well, too, that the community might be asking as we continue to approach these steps moving towards it. So now costs. Again, I want to say that these are estimated costs right now as we're going. But if we're looking at year 1, I shared with you the number of what teacher laptops could be costing. We have equity in place, and we have some support as well. Now, support would really be looking at how are we supporting our staff with this? What type of professional development could be in place? Not only just with how to use Schoology, but how could you effectively be using it in your classroom as well, too? Our mantra and our focus is always going to be, let's work smarter, not harder in that area, right? So we don't want to create more work for anybody with this. We just want people to be able to see different ways that they could be delivering information, and students could be learning in different ways as well, too. On the infrastructure side, we've included $35,000 at the middle school. What that $35,000 would be doing would be filling certain gaps that we have in our middle school. As you guys are aware, with hopes of passing a bond, we'd be looking to do a complete entire overhaul. And so $35,000 is a place that we can start looking at what current classrooms might be missing in Access Point as a whole, and so that we'd be able to fill and band-aid some of those areas that we currently have. But this would not be a complete overhaul of where we are. We do have some line items available in the bond that we're looking at. So the middle schools as a whole, if we were looking at redoing the network cabling and updating the wireless to the newest and best out there, in the middle schools alone, we'd be looking at almost $2.7 million. Year 2, we have some added prices as a whole. And then year 3, that's when we'd be looking at the high schools as well. Now, I will tell you, when you look at infrastructure right there, infrastructure is really only looking at updating the wireless that we have in there. So that's not looking at the network cabling or anything like that. So if you're comparing a price like that compared to what might be in the bond in those line items, that's where you would see some differences in those costs as a whole. But just looking to try to get as up to speed as we possibly can. But in the long haul, our major goal is to be able to provide access to students anywhere and at any time. I believe that's my last slide, and so more than happy to stand around and answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Mr. Profeta.
I have a couple questions. Those infrastructure costs, is that sinking? Because I'm looking at this thinking we're spending $500,000 a year and it's going to go away. And so I don't want to add more than $500,000. Those infrastructure projects, can those be sinking fund projects?
So typically the part of any infrastructure that is literally infrastructure, so the wiring, pulling the cable, can be a sinking fund expense. Anything that's the box or the equipment, it cannot be. So we'd have to look at what that breakout is between those.
So money-wise, I guess they look okay. Was this at all connected to the technology planning that we did a year or so ago?
Well, I think that absolutely started a conversation that we were having throughout the community. And one of the things that we continued to hear is, obviously we know we don't want to necessarily go one-to-one. You do see that in certain districts from time to time, and you're constantly looking at this type of refresh. So by not going one-to-one and by going BYOD, this would allow us to focus much more on the infrastructure as a whole and continue to update that area.
Was that technology planning group, did they seem supportive of a BYOD program? Or?
Well, when we ended those meetings, we had conversations, and one of the pieces that we did understand through that is we are behind compared to several other districts as a whole. I don't believe, Mr. Profeta, that we certainly stated that this absolutely has to be a must, but you could certainly see that that's where we were going in that direction when we were talking about access.
I guess what I'm getting at, was there ever a discussion of, so one-to-one is out, I get that, but there are other alternatives to bring your own device. Were classroom sets ever, I know there are budgetary issues
Sure.
there, but was that something that was ever looked at? Or?
We haven't continued that. So this is what we've looked at so far.
Okay.
Question differently, because I think if you chose to put enough carts in the buildings, you'd be spending a whole lot more money than you
Definitely,
are currently.
yeah.
So the idea behind the teacher laptops in comparison to, and that's why we went with the bring your own device. I think the one thing that's missing out of your conversation, Chris, is that you've had a technology cabinet that's been in place for all year long. And so Schoology, bring your own device, the whole Wi-Fi issue, some of those things have been ongoing discussions. And what do you have those every other month? And
yes,
so
sir.
There have been agendas and there have been some input to this by teachers. The other thing we talked about today was simply that, so what if a teacher said, I don't want a new laptop, I'll just keep my desktop? The point of it is that desktop is on its last leg or will become obsolete over time. So if they chose not to take one the first year, would they still be offered one the second year or the third year? And so that would be something that we would have to take into consideration if somebody said, I'll just keep my desktop, I'm going to retire in a couple years, I don't need a new laptop. Secondly, because we have lagged in this area and really haven't done much in this area, it is also that we may have teachers that already have their own devices. And so then how could we allow them to come in as guest services like we do our bring your own device students? So we talked about that a little bit today too. And then I think the other thing that we haven't done is we've done this as a 3-year layout or budget. I don't know what the process would be or how Mrs. Abby or Chris could take care of this. Could you do this over a 5-year time frame and meaning the payout or the payback, such as the loan has been in the past, could that be over a 5-year or 4-year time frame, and then further reduce the costs per year? So it would make it a little bit more affordable to be able to do so. So those are some things we're looking at, but very honestly, tonight, the discussion is bring your own device, something that the board is interested in moving forward with. If you are, we have given you enough information tonight to be able to do that. It's something that, in my past experience, is you need to begin to start talking to parents. It's April 9th, and we're looking at one-time investment in a bring your own device. These devices will last 3 or 4 years. So if a 6th grader buys this, they're going to refresh it probably as a freshman. If they're buying it as a 7th grader or a 10th grader. So we need to kind of get this out, and we need to start having some parent meetings and student meetings so that they can begin to understand that this is something that's going to be, and also his survey that we're talking about. So one of the big things we want to take away from tonight is this got any legs? Has it got any opportunity to move forward? If it doesn't, then, you know, we leave it alone and walk away from it. But I would also, as I've told Chris several times, we're probably at least 5 to 8 years behind where our peers are in Michigan currently on what they're doing currently.
Just in response to that, you definitely don't have to sell me on the fact that we need to do something about technology, and I'm glad to see that we are. But I do need to be sold on why bring your own device is the best option, other than obviously there's the budgetary reason, but like I said, obviously one-to-one isn't something that we can do, and I am glad that we're having the discussion. My worry is the lack of consistency across the district. I think there are some day-to-day logistical problems that would arise. I'm sure teachers can handle, but kids, you know, don't bring their device with them, or it's not charged, or things like that. But buildings can handle that. Overall, though, I have concerns with requiring something that we don't provide to everybody. And it doesn't have to be, it's not one-to-one or bring your own device. There obviously are other alternatives, so that's just my concern. But I recognize and I understand that we have budgets that we have to work with, and this is an alternative that is viable. I just want to make sure that it's the best academic alternative we have.
Ms. Apke.
Chris, I heard you say that in estimation, best guess, 20% of our students may not be able to provide their own devices. That would, I want to confirm that number.
That's correct.
I think it's going to be a lot higher than that, based on no science whatsoever. Okay, I'm hearing this as a board member. I agree with Chris. There's no question we are behind other districts with regards to technology and providing our kids the opportunity to experience what they're going to need in college, and that we need to move in this direction. But when I think about, I'm going to throw my kids under the bus. When I think about the Abke children, neither one of them have this device. And based on the age of my kids, you're talking about the family buying 3 potentially Chromebooks, or 1 for each kid, and then as it expires in 3 or 4 years, again, because I have a 7th grader. I don't know that our families are going to be behind providing this, and if they are not behind providing this, then suddenly that 20% number that we might, because we as a district have to, if this is the direction that we're moving, we have to provide for kids that aren't able to bring their own device, which we were talking about earlier. I think we might see that 20% number grow tremendously based on a family's willingness to provide this. It's not like going out and buying pencils and folders in August.
Sure.
Okay, it's a huge investment. So that would be my concern. I understand historically where we have been as a district. I understand historically what the community has said with regard, in the past, what the community has said with regards to one-to-one. I understand all the budget things, but I'm not sure how we'd sell this to our parents. That's just my first reaction.
Mr. Ismail.
A number of questions. First of all, thanks for the presentation, Mr. Stanley. I always look forward to your presentations. They're always so organized and clean.
Thank you, sir.
Clear cut. Have you researched at all something about, assuming you find a vendor, a primary vendor you want to use for these Chromebooks, coming up with some kind of plan where the parent can buy them over time? Some kind of payment plan program for the parent?
You know, I'll tell you what, Mr. Ishmael. Now, when you're saying a parent, you're talking about the Chromebook itself, not the teacher laptops, obviously.
Right. Just the parent, if they want to go buy this, is there some place they can pay $29 a month to that's organized somehow through education program that Chromebook has?
You know, when speaking with several districts and looking into this a bit, many districts took the approach of this is the suggestion and the recommendation that we're making. They didn't have anything with a payment plan or anything of those sorts from the districts that I did some research on. So I didn't see anything in those areas of, you know, over time you'd then be able to purchase the device that we've been providing to you.
Okay. Next question. Assuming we provide the 20%, you know, we take those devices and give them to 20% of the students, who takes care of liability insurance if they're lost or dropped or stolen? How does that all work?
Yes, Lisa.
A district-owned property, the district would be responsible for student-owned property. The student's own home insurance property would be responsible for that.
So we would maintain
Just like anything they bring to school today.
Right.
No
I
different than anything
understand
else
that.
they bring.
I'm talking about the items, though, that we're giving them. Is the parent has no responsibility for that?
So I can answer this a slightly different way. Think we already give kids hundreds of dollars worth of stuff every year. It's their textbooks. And we charge them at the end of the year. If you don't return your textbook, you get charged. So if we give the students, I mean, frankly, that's actually only worth like 2 of our more expensive textbooks.
Right.
Do you know
I
what I'm saying? So
understand
we already have a system in place that does that piece. So if you check that out and you don't return it, you're going to get charged just like if you don't return your AP US history book.
So if this is damaged on the way to school and they say, I need a new one, they pay for it? That's what I'm trying to understand.
There's some of those details to work out. Districts have done it different ways. Most districts have some sort of agreement with the parent as to damage if they take it home.
And I think Mrs. Apke and Mr. Profeta said this, and I guess the one way to navigate this to not have the equity conversation is for the district to provide everybody a device.
Right.
Transparently, this community said resoundingly 3 years ago they were not interested in that. Do you know what I'm saying? So what you're going to have to do, I mean, simplistically, we can choose to do nothing. That's always an option. Or we're going to have to do some sort of hybrid model of we provide some and parents provide some. We can argue about who does what percentage and all those sorts of pieces. I get all that part. But that's really what it comes down to. You know,
I totally understand that. That's not what my question was.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith. I wasn't trying to argue with you in any way.
I totally get that.
Okay.
My question is if a parent signs one of these out, is the parent responsible for anything, or is it totally the school's?
We'll get the answer. Yeah. We'll get you an answer back on that. It's a good question.
Parents responsible.
The answer is parents responsible is what we said earlier. I mean, and that's where we are currently. I mean, there has to be some agreement that if you're going to, so to speak, borrow, lease, take the computer for the year, that you have some parent liability in that or parent responsibility in that. No, as John said, no different than our textbooks. And the extra support we need or would need in that case are for any down machines we have, and been there, done that, and Chris has 2 in his previous district. You have a lot sometimes you get a case of lemons and you have some breakage or you have some things. What I did find though, and this is kind of national and otherwise, several of the districts that started this gave their students one-on-ones, and the amount of damage and the amount of loss is minimal.
It is.
It's very minimal, and if you, because one, it's valued, and 2, if we provide some form of case for these or suggest a case, it's the most of it is dropping it off your desk. So if it comes off your desk, you have to have some ability to be able to break that fall. But most of it is, most of our tables or desks at the middle school level are flat, so we don't have issues with it falling in that format.
So one last question,
Yes.
if I could, Mr.
Yeah,
Stanley.
please.
Then when a parent purchases their own Chromebook, they bring it to school, how do you how do you, when they take it home, they say, hey, I want to use it for whatever I want to use it for. How do you handle that?
If the student owns the device that the parent purchases, that is their device when they take that
Okay.
home. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier, that if we were providing a device to students, we would have to have some type of load
Right,
filter
right.
in place. But if that is your device, once you are off our network, it is your device on your own home
So
network.
when they bring their device into our network, you have a way of controlling it, so they're not on Facebook all day long?
Correct. One of the things that, that our technology team has been doing is been working with several vendors on what it could look like to authenticate certain things.
Right.
As of right now, our current Wi-Fi access, most of our students are logging on to guest, right? On these devices, this would be something that they would need to log into. Let's just call it student, right?
Right.
And so with student, we're then able to authenticate very simple things, but we can also see who is on what device at those times too. But there's a filter in place for any of those different types of things out
Got
there.
it. Thank you. Thanks again for the complete
Absolutely.
presentation.
You have something?
So just so I understand a little bit here, but I think I do. So we're going to save $500,000 a year by not replacing every desktop in the school or leasing them,
Well,
basically.
so we're talking on the teacher laptop side, correct?
Right.
Okay. So we're looking at this over time. Now, obviously, the reason why the price was so high was because we purchased 3,000 devices,
Right.
right? And so those devices not only were just for teacher desktops, they were also for labs as well, right?
Okay.
So at this moment, there's not really a strong plan to be removing all of those items that are out there. But in the long run, this is just the area that we're focusing on is the
Look,
teacher laptops.
I don't use my desktop at home
Sure.
at all anymore. I have 2 kids in college who don't carry a textbook, haven't carried a textbook in years. My daughter does all her college homework on her MacBook. Nothing. So we need to start preparing our kids. I mean, and my daughter's in her 4th year of college. My other student who's in college is in his 1st year, same thing. Doesn't bring books home, does all his homework on his laptop. If we're going to get our kids college ready, we have to be looking at this. As far as I'm concerned, this district is already way behind the 8 ball in that. I mean, Harper Woods has one-to-one devices for their kids. Fraser has one-to-one devices for their kids. This is Grosse, Pointe public schools, for goodness sakes. We should be giving our kids every advantage we possibly can to get them into the schools they want to get into and to have the educational experience they should be able to have. So I'm 100% behind this. I understand there's an equity issue and we're going to have to find a way to make it work. But I really feel like I bet our teachers would, I don't know, Mike's probably going to get up and talk, but would prefer to walk around with a laptop. You can move around your room. You're not stuck behind a desk. It's just a much better model for our students educational-wise. And as a mom, Margaret's kids are in college, they don't use books anymore. They don't use desktops anymore. My senior in high school, I think every once in a blue moon he goes up on the desktop, but he does his homework on it.
Right.
And he's got a Chromebook.
First, I'd like to also echo Mr. Ismail's comments. Your presentation's great. This is the kind of thing I've been looking for a couple of years, to see a real laid out plan that's thoughtful. I'm hoping, because we're 7 to 8 years behind, we're not reinventing the wheel. It doesn't sound, based on your presentation, it looks like you went around other districts to see what
That's
they're
correct.
doing. So anything that we do here, we can model. It's been tested, it's been done. Now we're just playing catch up, which is kind of sad. I think we should be a leader, not playing catch up. But I appreciate that you're doing that. So a lot of these details that we're talking about here, we can work them out. You can look to see what's worked in other districts. We'll be able to. I will note we need to make some policy changes probably. So the policy committee should start looking at our personal, or what do they call it, PCD policies. Because I think there's probably going to be some adjustments that will be needed to be made regarding that. We don't need to go through that right now, but I'm just saying that's something that if we're going to get this thing going, we want to be ready to go at the time that it's done, that we're going to roll this out. Not sure that I agree. Somebody said that the community said there was a resounding no with one-to-one devices. This goes to equity. I'm not sure that there was a resounding no to that particular piece so much as financing short-term assets with long-term financing.
Sure.
That was a resounding no. I completely understand that. maybe we consider it, but I mean, looking at our operating budget, I don't see how we're going to be able to go to 1-to-1 or even something remotely close to that, so that's something to consider. But I appreciate the work you guys have done on this. I support it completely. I agree with Mrs. Gaffa's comments that, everyone's using this stuff now. Although I will say, I was just offered my choice of device at my new firm, and I chose to have a desktop only because I don't like to write like this all day long. But I know I'm obviously the oldest one on this board. So I do think that this is a great start to this. I completely support it. I'm not hearing any real negatives from the board as far as moving forward. Maybe we need to tweak it. There's going to be policy discussions and some further financial issues, but Ms. Wertz, you wanted to add something there?
I also wholeheartedly support going in this direction. I think this is maybe a compromise, obviously, but something that we have to do. It's funny because we kind of have our own devices here. We went away from paper and having our packets delivered to bringing our own device, and we have the Wi-Fi, and we definitely have to move in this direction. I also commend you for getting this committee together, getting in this plan in order. Support it 100%.
Well, this has been a very big team effort, so.
Great.
And I did hear you say that you had the teachers involved, which is...
Well, we have a technology cabinet, and so we've been having these conversations as we move forward.
Okay, good.
So developing those types of plans.
Mr. Profeta?
So, other than the budget part of it and the money part of it, can you make the argument to me that bring your own device is academically better than a classroom set?
Well, I think with the bring your own device model, students would be able to take them out of the classroom. And so, a classroom set, I think, is a fantastic start. I think we might not even be having these conversations if we didn't have those already provided to us. I mean, you should see some of the things that the students are doing with those models.
I don't mean to cut you off, but
Right.
don't take me, I'm not saying that what we have now is good enough.
Sure,
I'm not suggesting that at all.
I think what that would do, Mr. Profeta, is, again, it's going to take the learning outside of the confines of the classroom. With just class laptops available to students, students know that they would only be using those laptops at that certain time. I like to use the word mindset quite a bit, but I think that this is really part of it, and I'm only sharing this because in a previous district, that's sort of where we were with it. It's almost a theoretical shift a little bit, because once you start to realize, hey, this learning that I have in here doesn't just have to go throughout those 49, 52 minutes that I have available in the classroom. I can now take this elsewhere, and I could do it on my time. That's really helped out quite a bit.
That is a good point.
All right, the one thing that the board needs to understand and know is there is anytime you're changing things, there is always the chance of some risk. And the risk for us is simply the factor that we have not got the Wi-Fi in place that we're going to possibly need if we everybody bring a device. And so one of the things in that line item in there that talks a little bit about infrastructure, if we were to pass the referendum, we would have no problem with infrastructure from that point on. But if we don't pass the referendum, the infrastructure will always be a stretch for us as to whether we can get enough devices in. And one of the things I talked to Chris about today was, let's go out in the buildings and load them up. In other words, put 3 classrooms in a row, put them in 30 devices in each room, and let them fire up their cell phones at the same time and see how much we get disrupted. And point of it is if we need more Wi-Fi, we're going to have to pay for that as we go along. If we pass a referendum in November, the Wi-Fi would be something we would add very quickly. Once we got monies flowing and available to us, that would be one of our first priorities, to be able to get to all 5 of our secondary schools. So I think one of our fears is that we don't have enough Wi-Fi at this point in time. I do know we have enough bandwidth. Bandwidth-wise, again, this would be the Rocket Fiber project. If that would go through, then that would give us the pipeline that we need from the outside, as well as then gearing up for the inside. So that's the only down that I see. And if you have everybody go out and buy their own device, they're going to expect service. So that'll be something we'll have to continue to monitor and work on as we go through this spring.
So what would happen, I mean, essentially, if we didn't get this bond to pass, and we could have a situation where people are trying to teach and nobody can access the internet because too many people are trying to reach it, is that what?
That's
the
correct.
risk?
I mean, I believe even where we are, because just being completely transparent, obviously we'll be doing quite a few tests, but without a bond being passed in here, we'd have to be going, well, we have to limit if somebody's streaming something in their classroom, or what type of tweaks are going to have to currently be
Has that
made.
been done in other districts where they've got the same internet capacity or problems that we do, or infrastructure problems that we do?
Let me clarify, has what been done? Has
Well,
BYOD
dealing with the situation where you actually have to limit how people are using their devices to cope with the fact that you have old infrastructure that isn't really.
We're doing that currently. We're doing it currently. Garrett's taken down different sites in different situations. We talked about it today. We may have to gear down again in order to be able to get that accomplished. But those are the trial and error issues that we get into, and there may have to be an infusion of to get the Wi-Fi where it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
The present wiring at our middle schools, particularly Parcells, is such that we could put the new Wi-Fi in. The wiring could be put in later, but you could also put the devices in currently. And we talked today about doing that at Pierce and Brownell, as if we found out we weren't going to be able to, and we talked about what the minimal amount of money we could invest in that, since an infusion of money from the referendum would give us plenty of money to be able to get all this accomplished. So we don't want to spend it early. And then, Chris, you asked us a question earlier that I didn't respond to. E-rate is eligible, but E-rate is we all rushed through this on March 22nd. The problem is we have to have an application in. We didn't file anything for Wi-Fi for this coming school year. So the first time we could go out for bid for that would be July 1st, and then we can't file for it until March of next year. So if you pass the referendum, if you put all that in, we would be putting a whole bunch of stuff into E-rate to get the 40% for all the wiring and work that we'd have to do on each of the secondary buildings for the summer of 2019. So your answer to your question is yes, if it's wiring and if it's the Wi-Fi system itself, but no end devices.
And I may have missed it, but are the infrastructure things in there currently, are those also in the bond proposal or we don't have language, but?
Yeah, these are minimal just because
Correct.
we wanted to not spend the money if we thought we were going to get something on a referendum.
So if we passed a bond, those infrastructure lines
Yeah,
would
go
go
away.
away?
Yes, absolutely. And again, that infrastructure that I'm sharing right there would just be the equipment as a whole. That would not be the network recabling or anything like that.
I have another.
Mr. Ismail?
Go ahead.
You sure? Well, I was just curious about elementary, if there was a plan at some point to look at elementary schools.
As of right now, our focus is just going to be on the secondary end. I've certainly seen such an increase of the use of Chromebooks in the classroom, but personally to me, I don't know how necessary it would be to have a third grader walking around with a Chromebook at every single moment.
Okay.
It's my own thoughts with that.
We got a bunch of Chromebooks in this year.
Pope Hard, we have a lot of Chromebooks.
Yes, that's correct.
Right
Yeah.
now.
Mr. Ismail?
Let's take a look at this whole plan. Let's assume that the rocket fiber loop does not go through and the bond doesn't pass. What do we do with this? Scrap that bottom line.
Scrap it. You don't have any option, really. You're going to put Band-Aids on it until you get a referendum passed.
Okay.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
the bottom line of it is rocket fiber right now will give us 10 gigs. We currently use somewhere around a gig a day. And so the point of it is we're paying for 3 gigs. It's $268,000 we paid last time. If we gear up and go and got where we need to be and we didn't do rocket fiber, we would probably triple our price for our bandwidth that we would need in order to be able to get the 10 gigs or 5 gigs. Our servers will, or I mean, our filters will take care of 5 gig. So we
That's
have,
correct.
we have the capacity to take our servers up to 5 gig. 5 gig would be unbelievable amount of bandwidth that we probably wouldn't use. But the bottom line of it is we would share the 10 gigs with the other municipals, but I don't see them as being heavy users until they get to the point that they're running a lot of live stream video at their traffic lights and that type of thing.
Right. For example, one of the things that we'd be looking at right now by just placing Band-Aids on items is we certainly know that kids have a personal device on their own. With bringing in these items as well, because we haven't passed a bond at this point, we'd have to be having those conversations of, well, you need to turn your cell phone off, right? You need to make sure that you're not doing this or you're not doing that so that we can make sure that this is working in there. At some point, you know, you'd like to be able to have an environment that really wouldn't be that much of a worry. We're also starting to see through some of the research that I've been doing that there's going to always be an increase of use every single year as we continue to go. And so just trying to prepare for that and future-proof that as well.
Any other comment? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you. What's it?